good morning. Welcome to another Driving with Dr. Sil video. I still haven't worked out the title for this series. Oh well. And I realize I've been kind of avoiding making these kind of videos because I haven't worked out specific topics I want to discuss in each video. But I think the goal of these videos is that they're less formal than my other more topic-based videos. This is more kind of musings, reflections, discussions around the grey areas, I guess, of mental health. So these are definitely not, medical advice or anything. But so I kind of just started this video without a very clean idea of what to talk about. But the things I want to discuss, I think, are around the displaying of emotion as a caregiver in mental health. How much emotion to display, kind of thing. And just take it from there. Just see where my rants, I guess, for lack of a better word, see where my rants take us on this journey. So I remember doing my palliative care term, there was this person with with an endometrial cancer, and she was in her 40s. She was Buddhist and very peaceful, kind, tranquil individual. Just a very sweet woman, and her endometrial cancer was getting worse. No matter what the oncology team did, it was getting worse. It wasn't getting better, and she was dying. And the oncologist, and I think in the room was the oncologist, the palliative care doctor, and myself. And we're kind of just breaking the news to her that it's getting worse and that it's time to do palliative care, which is very hard for anyone who's 47, with two. Oh, no, I think she didn't have kids as well. Anyway, this was a long time ago, I'm sorry. But what I remember of the event was just the oncologist crying. And it was very moving and devastating kind of review. And I'm sure there was some, what's the right term? Well, I guess definitely countertransference, which is the term where people are, when a caregivers, it's basically the term that summarizes how a caregiver feels about their patient. And it's usually influenced by the caregiver's experience with similar people in their past. And in this case, the oncologist and the patient were similar age, similar background, and I can imagine that would have been quite triggering for the oncologist, who was struggling to contain themselves in the review. And I talked to the palliative care doctor afterwards as well about the review. We reflected on it because I had also shed some tears in another review, and I was just talking about how much emotion should a doctor show? Because at the end of the day, you are a human before you are a doctor, and as a human you have emotions, and they're probably the most prominent aspect of life. Anyway, you show emotions as a human, but as a caregiver, you need to. It's not as easy as just express how you feel. You can't just cry in a review, even if it's very sad. Obviously, you can only regulate your emotions so much, and everyone has a breaking point. But I think the goal of displaying emotions in reviews is essentially you can display emotions to the point where the attention is not shifted from the patient to you, because your role and the purpose of the review is the patient, right? They're the ones who are seeking help. If you need help as a caregiver, you should, see a psychologist, get professional help. But in the review of taking care of a patient who are disclosing whatever they're disclosing and the emotions that you're going through, you have a duty to the patient to not take the attention off them and make it about you. Because obviously, if someone is telling me about their whatever sexual trauma, whatever the trauma it is, and I'm getting tearful, and I need to be consoled, then that's a problem, because this person is talking about something extremely difficult to talk about. Any kind of resistance could be an issue. You want to try and keep it as open and as safe as possible. And if I start sobbing and they have to give me tissues or something, then that's really affected the dynamics of the room. Now that's it. There's a caveat here as well, because you have to balance your ability to stay composed but not be detached, which is not that easy. And I had a thought relating to detached caregivers. What was it? Yeah, so one thing that patients often do find helpful, and this needs to be done with expertise, is when their therapist becomes a bit more personal, and exposes a little bit of themselves in the review. Makes the patient realize they're not alone by being a bit vulnerable with the patient. Now that carries risks, again, because the focus is on the patient and how they can get better. And what does tend to happen, especially in naive therapists like myself, is, well, I haven't done this, I hope, because maybe it can happen unconsciously. But if you have not processed your shit, if you have not done your own therapy, well, then you are at risk of bootlegging your patient's therapy session. So there's a tale in one of Dr. Irvin Yalom's books around how there was a group therapy session and people in the group were disclosing their history of sexual assault, and the therapist in the group, who was junior, disclosed her history of sexual assault as well to the group, which is a very complicated thing, but probably is not the right thing to do. And the concern was that since this had not been processed with a psychologist, that this was something she was unconsciously using the group for her own psychotherapy. Anyway, it's more complicated than that, and it's a complicated thing. But essentially, when you do give little anecdotes or empathetic statements that relate to your own life, a lot of patients do find that helpful to a point. But yeah, you have to find that balance. But I'd be keen to hear what your experiences have been. Have you ever had a therapist kind of break down in front of you or cry, or did you find it helpful? Did you feel it distracted from you? Did you feel you had to console them? Or would you rather your therapist have a little bit more emotion? Because this is an interesting point. A lot of the psychoanalysis, the Freudian style psychotherapy, it's really therapy in the void of attachment. So it's super cold. I mean, you don't even, depending on how they do the therapy session, but in classical psychoanalysis, you don't even see the therapist. Like, you're in a couch facing away and just chatting. You're just saying, stream of thought, whatever's coming to your mind's eye. And there's no attachment, so it's a really cold interaction. There's no emotions from the psychotherapist a lot of the time. And that's certainly not the type of therapy that I would want, because I get a lot out of attachment and connection and exploring transference and countertransference. And I think that's the way that I would want to give therapy and receive therapy, because that emotional salience is what makes life worth living. So you want a connection. For me, I'm projecting. If you guys have done psychoanalysis and other types of therapy, I'd be keen to hear your reflections on what it was like having therapy based on more, an attachment with the therapist versus not. A lot of people, especially if they've had issues in their development around trust and neglect and abuse, they've got to find a therapist that they can attach to, to show them that the world is safe and that they can trust people, and then use that relationship as a springboard to form more relationships outside of the therapist relationship. And it isn't simple, because you're obviously paying this person for the relationship, so that does affect the genuineness, I guess. But it's about proving that you can just have that safe relationships are possible, and you can be vulnerable and safe with certain people, and retraining your brain to believe that if you've had a tricky past that has not shown you that the world can be a safe place. So I do think the attachment there and connection is really important, in that when a therapist brings a bit of themselves into the therapy, it can be okay. But it just has to be done with expertise. Anyway, I have never done psychotherapy myself, which is a problem, and I'm keen. I'm getting to the point now where I'm ready to do it. For me, it's been mostly financial that has been my main barrier. When I talk to my friends and stuff, I love talking about myself. Like introspecting why I am the way I am, thinking about past relationships, why they've influenced me and how I am today, thinking of my upbringing and how different things in my childhood influenced who I am today, and trying to see the defense mechanisms I use when I find things are harder to talk about. And I love doing that, and I think that would be a really cool thing to explore with a therapist. It's obviously expensive to get therapy, especially if it's not, if it's private psychotherapy. And the therapy that I would want would probably be existential psychotherapy flavor, or psychodynamic and existential. Yeah. But it's expensive. I've been putting out some feelers. I've been asking the psychologists I've worked with if they know any psychotherapists that would be a good match. I feel like I'm dating. And you know what? Seeing a therapist is very much like dating. You do need to find the right fit for you. And much more important than the actual style of therapy that someone does, whether it's DBT, CBT, schema, or whatever, much more important than all of that is the therapeutic alliance. Can you trust this person and be open with them? You don't have to really like them, but you need to believe that you've got to have that professional rapport, that alliance, that you're both trying to just get you better. I don't know what to do about this whole cost of therapy issue. It is a big problem, because a lot of the world's mental illness needs therapy. All this depression, anxiety, ADHD, ASD grouping benefits from psychotherapy, and it's expensive and takes time. So, I've previously talked about how you can find therapy in other places, like a good sports coach or a good friend, but they aren't your carers, and your friends, although it's good to be able to be open with them, you shouldn't burden them to the point where, the friendship gets affected because you're doing what you need to do with the therapist in the friendship. And it's so important to maintain good friendships in life, my God. It's so important to have good friends. That would be something I would talk about, how much I'm missing my friends who are overseas. But I'm very grateful because they're coming back to Australia this summer, so I'll be seeing lots of old friends these holidays. I don't know why I'm saying these holidays. I'm working all through, but I've got a bunch of weekends off. Not this weekend, but a bunch of the other weekends I have off. Now this weekend I'm working at it's not a new hospital, but I have never done an after hours or an out of hours shift at this hospital, so it'll be interesting. Don't mind me picking my nose. I think I've got hair in my nose that's making everything tickle. I'm going to be scratching my nose all day. I think I need to pluck my nose hairs. Too much information, sorry. I guess another thing to say about emotional regulation is, a core part of dialectical behavioral therapy, which is a very important type of therapy for people who have emotional dysregulation or impulsivity issues. It's very important therapy for them. but a core part of it is emotional regulation. And so as a therapist, if you're able to show a patient that, something they've said is very moving and you feel very sad, but you're able to keep yourself composed even if there's some tears in your eyes or whatever, then that's really positive, because you're acting as a model for them to, because maybe they've never seen an adult kind of act that way. Maybe they've never had a model of what emotional regulation looks like, and so that therefore, it's therapeutic to them to see that, because they can use that as a modeling. I just had a memory of one time when I was talking to a patient who was talking about their history of sexual assault, and just so you guys know, when you go to hospital, you don't have to talk about all this stuff, right? Like, a lot of people, this is a common concern people have, that, if I see a psychologist or if I see a psychiatrist, I have to talk about all my trauma. You don't, right? Things are taken at your pace. It's helpful for me to know that there's been a trauma history, because the defenses that people develop after experiencing trauma, whether it's adaptive or maladaptive defenses, can play into the symptoms we see and into the therapy and the kind of discharge planning. But if someone doesn't want to talk about their trauma, that's fine. They're in control of what they talk about. In fact, I often say, look, you don't have to answer any questions you don't want to answer, but but if you want to, talk about it. So anyway, I remember talking to a patient about their history of sexual trauma, and they were telling it in a bit of detail, and the nurse actually left the room, which was a tricky situation for me. Because first of all, if you have a vulnerable young woman and you're a male caregiver, you should always have another person in the room, and ideally another female in the room. Because, it doesn't, one misunderstanding, it's just, or if you have a legislative patient who has made a lot of complaints, it can be a problem. And so for me, it's really important to have a nurse or someone else in the room, and it makes the patient feel a bit, less vulnerable as well, because they've got someone else in the room. It's not just this stranger and them. But I'm a nice guy, whatever. But it's just, that's just a risk. That's just something we do. And it also protects me, because if someone attacks me, there's another person that can call for help or something like that. And I hope I'm not promoting the stigma around violence and mental illness. We just people with mental illness are far more often the victims of crime rather than the perpetrators. But, unfortunately in mental health wards, there are people who are unwell and sometimes are agitated or disorganized, and can be violent. It's just the truth of the job. So anyway, I'm just saying it's important for me to have another person in the room. Anyway, this nurse who was in the room with me while this young vulnerable woman was talking about her history of being sexually assaulted, left the room because it was too triggering for her, which is totally fine. But I don't really know what to do, but I just completed the session because I didn't want the patient to feel like I was going to terminate the session. But it put me in an awkward situation where we're talking about difficult things, and it's just me alone. And if the patient felt, if the patient felt harassed in any way, verbally, I'd have no one to kind of back what happened, to back me, to see what had happened. So I tried. I think I ended up talking to the nurse and just being like, look, it's totally fine if you need to take space. You got to protect yourself for sure, but try and ask another nurse to come in to the room to help, just to protect me as well. So that's an interesting one. That's actually happened to me twice, where a nurse has left midway and we've just stopped. The nurse, where I've continued, but the nurse has just left midway. Yeah. Anyway, guys, interesting how to balance the emotions in a very emotional field. Let me know your thoughts. But other than that, I wish you all just a beautiful day, full of love and connection, and I'll see you all in the next video. Bye for now.